There's this assumption when you see it on shelf that someone maybe rang the factory, picked up the phone, and then it arrived in, whereas actually there's probably like 100 steps and so many people needed to get there.
Glamorous beauty brand with a makeup artist founder who's great on social media, but you're also the person negotiating factory contracts or terms in Seoul, or managing sea freight and signing leases in Carnaby Street, or running in a 100-people org.
You can't scrimp on areas like product and supply chain if you're looking to scale, because they become actually all of the levers that need to be working like your engine of the car. It's tough when you're a self-funded business. The further out you forecast, the more you're tying your cash up in stock. That's, you're not going to get paid for a very long time.
Welcome to Treyd Secrets, the podcast where we go deep with operators building and scaling real inventory-heavy businesses. What's the thing about running a business at this scale that no one told you about? The Irish beauty brand she launched in 2016 at only 23, straight out of college with her life savings. No co-founder, no outside capital. Now, 9 or 10 years later, Sculpted has over 160 products, 100 plus people, north of 40 million euros in revenue. Aimee, welcome.
The devil is in the detail.
Lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited about this. It's a really impressive journey you're on, I must say. And maybe from the outside, Sculpted looks like this glamorous beauty brand with a makeup artist founder who's great on social media, but you're also the person negotiating factory contracts or terms in Seoul, or managing sea freight and signing leases in Carnaby Street, or running in a 100-people org. Do people underestimate the operational side? And maybe that even works in your favor.
Yeah, I think definitely people underestimate what it actually takes to build a brand. And I think it's understandable that they do, because honestly, I had absolutely no idea to the extent of it until I was thrown in the deep end of it. And I think it's impossible to actually get the full layers. Like, even still to this day, if someone new joins the team, I'll always sit with them in their first 2 weeks. And one of the questions I always ask is, what's one of your biggest surprises? What shocked you coming in here? And generally, 9 times out of 10, the feedback is the level of detail that we actually have to work on to bring a product to market. Because there's this assumption when you see it on shelf that someone maybe rang the factory, picked up the phone, and then it arrived in, whereas actually there's probably like 100 steps and so many people needed to get there. Thankfully, these days, you referenced my great team. I am not the sole person, doing all those negotiations and freight management anymore. But I was at the start. I was a one-woman band who was, meeting with manufacturers, talking to product specs, doing the sales pitch into buyers, ringing custom freight companies, pretending to work for someone else to understand how I would actually bring the product in and what I needed to do pro forma and documentation-wise, and very much learning on the job as it went. I will say though, the operational side I love. Like, I love the nitty gritty business side of things. So I would never shy away from it.
Yeah. No co-founder, and you never worked for anyone else, fundamentally. What's the loneliest decision you ever had to make?
There's been plenty of them. I would say, and not that I've had to do this, thankfully, commonly or, frequently at all, but the people side, I think, really get to you, and they play on your heart a bit, because you work so closely with humans that really, are putting the effort in. But I had quite a senior hire that didn't work out, and that felt very lonely, because I was my first time in a situation where I have to make the steps to let this person go. I knew I had gotten to a stage where it was the right thing, because the misculture fit was impacting and influencing others around them. So it got into a stage where it wasn't just me feeling it. It was like, I'm actually seeing it. So, you act to protect your business straight away. But that's hard, because it weighs on you. It's on your shoulders. You're maybe not sleeping the night or two before. And I would hate to ever get to a stage where I think, that gets easier, because, you get used to it. And thankfully, like I said, it's not a very regular occurrence at all. But I do remember my first time having to do that and given the seniority of the role, it felt like I was mentally wiped after it happened.
Has that changed now that you've scaled the business to this level?
No, I don't think people will ever not play on my mind or my heart.
Yeah.
I think what it does do though is that it taught me really clearly that if ever you feel that there's even 1% that is off, to listen to that, because it's not just, it starts usually with something small and then progresses into something bigger. And like I said, my turning point was when I could see the negative influence on the other team members, or kind of the culture that was arriving in that certain part of the business. And you just have to act quickly when you see that. So I've more so taken learnings to not have to repeat any event like that,
Yeah.
rather than kind of getting used to it as a skill.
Have you learned some lessons for how to hire to avoid that as much as possible? I mean, hiring is, at least to me, the hardest of
Yeah,
anything, right?
it is. And people can be like amazing salespeople in interviews. And sometimes you can do all that you feel that you need to do, and it can still show up not as you thought when they start working in the role. So some practical things that I've done is we have different like hiring committees. So it means that you've got a hiring manager who's in the role, you have different people who will come in to kind of task or whatever they might be doing. But then there's a culture coffee at the end. So people who are completely unbiased to the actual role itself, the process that they've been on, and they're only deeming whether they're a sculpted fit or not. And that can be really interesting, because generally if you felt any sort of niggle, but maybe you're being swayed by the experience or the big company they've come from, and then if someone else comes in at the end and they say, yeah, they're great, but I thought this, it's usually like, yes, actually, if one or two of us have picked this up, it's not the right thing. So I think kind of stress testing in as much as you can with, I'm not saying like a huge volume of people, because you can have too many chefs in the kitchen as well.
Yeah.
But with more than just those who are maybe, because also you can have an element when someone really needs a role and they need to fill a gap, they can maybe sometimes get attached to a person who's good, but maybe not the best, because it's in the interest of like, I need a fix now. And that never works out. So when you can have someone who's a bit more removed from the need of the role, they can be a little bit more unbiased in their opinion as well.
I recognize. I'm gonna take this trick straight from your book, I think.
It works.
Yeah. What does your team structure look now? I mean, today, who reports to you, and
Yeah. So
on?
I have actually spent, I would say, the last 12 to 18 months really focusing on who reports into me, i.e. the leadership team. And this sounds probably strange to some, but I think I've gone on a journey as a CEO where you are the founder, you've got like 5 or 6 people around the table. You can all sit around the dining table and you can all fit and you can all talk and everyone knows, and you don't really need that many processes because everyone just hears it through osmosis. That then grows and grows. And then all of a sudden you get to a stage where you're still the kind of founder CEO and everyone is working in their area. And there was a huge shift then in the last 2 years where I really acknowledged that these aren't just my direct reports. These are the leadership team that essentially need to be with me on every single part of this journey, because I can't do this scaling on my own. So it was like this whole mindset shift on one of my objectives has to be how much time I put into that team to make them as high performing as they can, which means I need to level up, and all of us, and then it kind of trickles down. So thankfully, have spent, like I said, a lot of time doing that and have a great team around me now. So we'd have like your classic areas, like the people HR department, marketing, naturally, like everywhere is quite sprawling and quite big. They would host kind of brand, creative, social influencers under that title. And digital is a new enough area for us to kind of separate out on its own. I think given the pace of digital in the world that we're living in, it was important to me. Although we are omni-channel, we've got retail, D2C and flagships. By and large, what we do digitally is like this umbrella effect for how it shifts down to all other parts of the funnel. So I really wanted to separate that and have a focus on it.
What does digital mean for you?
Yeah, because it can mean a few things. For us, it basically means our own e-commerce, our e-retailers, so our partners online, and then sales, e-commerce channels, and AI.
So engineers, not only marketing, I am guessing.
Yeah, exactly. More kind of in the dev side of things, on the customer journey. And now in saying that, we do work with agencies who are actual UX developers, because we generally, we utilize platforms like a Shopify, for example. So you maybe don't need someone who's actually coding day to day. in the world that we're in. But yeah, they would basically be the liaisons with those teams. Then we have our finance and ops. So they would look after finance, operations, and supply. And we also have, who am I forgetting? Sorry, commercial. Commercial would look after all sales and trade. So heavy focus on our retail wholesale and our general commercial goals, tactics, channels. So yeah.
I mean, it's a significant structure, obviously, at that scale.
Yeah.
How do you, because you also, like, as you said, really interested in getting into the details of, I guess, both product and marketing and sourcing, and like, how do you balance that? Do you have to stay out of the details now, or?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. Like, and I also am laughing because I did mention product there, and obviously we're a product business, so product is also stable,
goes without
as you'd
saying.
expect. Exactly. Product kind of lives through me because that was definitely the reason I started the business. So it's kind of hand in hand.
Yeah.
But yeah, like things do definitely change and evolve as you grow. Why, the beginning where was maybe like a few ideas in the notes on my phone, which to be honest still happen, is now, like you said, a fully fledged operation, IT, and you can't scrimp on areas like product and supply chain if you're looking to scale, because they become actually all of the levers that need to be working like your engine of the car. And then you've got things like your marketing and your digital activation that are like the oil to keep them running and shining.
What's the thing about running a business at this scale that no one told you about?
So many things. How long do you have? I would say one of my biggest reflections as we're scaling now, and something I assume is going to continue long after, because we're looking to go into many more markets, is the challenge on balancing market maturity. So our main markets right now are Ireland, UK. And Ireland is more of a seasoned market for us. So we were here for about 5 years before we entered the UK. So the challenge is like trying to sustain and retain your existing market of loyal users, whilst also managing a new emerging market like the UK that maybe don't need the level of newness, maybe they need more of the core focus, but then you are actually operating from one global social channel, if you get me. So you're trying to balance and nurture the existing, bring in the new, do it in the one time, all while you're running on the treadmill. You can't get off the treadmill to take a side step because you need to keep it going. And like I said, I can only imagine that 5 and 10-fold when we enter the US or Australia or, somewhere in Europe, for example. So I assume it's just the nature of scaling.
Yeah. What are the concrete things that you would want to do different if you're in your emerging or new market like the UK versus your established Irish market?
So I think when you think about the level of product, I think any beauty consumer needs new, because they need to, beauty moves at such a pace that if you don't offer them any new, they could maybe feel like, it's uninteresting or it's boring or whatever it might be. But ultimately, like the golden rule typically is you'll make 80% of your sales from your top 20 SKUs. So your core lines have to be always on. And your core lines are really what you want to bring a new customer into the business by. So it's like that balance of making sure that they see your heroes, but you also need to give them some newness, but then you don't want to overwhelm them. So I think the key things for me when it comes to new market is being really clear in your product prioritization so that you are not overwhelming the customer and all that you have, and making sure that they can really see clearly where they need to sit or maybe what their first purchase might be. I think you need to have a formula, but you operate it as a test and learn, because one thing that you think might work could completely surprise you and fail miserably. And then another thing, you could be like, wow, I can't believe that caught on. And you're playing with probably a big budget, because every market you enter is most likely going to be a bigger task, bigger risk, bigger ambitions. So you have to manage that carefully and be reactive if it's not working, or else you're kind of running away cash very quickly.
Yeah. Is it the same products that work in all markets, or does it differ?
It does differ to a slight extent, but by and large, they're the same. Sometimes you can have different nuances with shades. So for example, a best-selling foundation shade in Ireland could vary slightly to the best-selling foundation shade in the UK, and could vary again to the best-selling foundation shade in the US. But definitely, yeah, there are some nuances. Like lips for us, for example, would be bigger in the UK than it would be in Ireland. So there's small little things like that can kind of fascinate you as you're going through it. But ultimately, and this is how kind of every business I think should be, your absolute heroes should by and large perform the same, because that shows that the majority of your business tactics is focused on the right things. And we would definitely have that pattern.
I'm also curious about the supply chain side of your business. You're sourcing, as I understand, mainly from South Korea. How did you end up with that setup, and what are the trade-offs?
So I deliberately sought out South Korea like 9 or 10 years ago because I really wanted the skincare focus in my formula. At the time, I wasn't even doing skincare. I didn't necessarily even have a plan to do skincare SKUs. It was very much just having a skin first, for example, peptides, hyaluronic, SPF, to my primer and to my foundations. Because for me, the skin was everything. You get that right and everything else is so simple after. So I deliberately sought them out, flew out to Seoul 3 weeks later after I met them in a trade show in Italy. And, 9 or 10 years later, they're still our biggest partner. And obviously, we've expanded across Korea in general in terms of manufacturing. So we generally make about 85% of our line there. And we do that deliberately so because of their skincare, I suppose, acceleration, their knowledge, their innovation, and because a skincare first formula is genuinely something that we live and die by. So it's not just, a nice marketing tactic that we put in and say, oh yeah, I have this. It's somewhere I travel out to once or twice a year. So I was there actually 3 weeks ago, spent the week in the lab. And I suppose the trade-offs, it's hard to say, right? Because we kind of only know manufacturing to that extent in that side of the world. Obviously, we have other parts of the world as well that we do. But when you're looking at the actual transit of freight, yes, you couldn't possibly find maybe a further destination to bring it into this part of Europe. So that can definitely add complexities, particularly in the world that we're living in with these macro events that really impact, be it sea freight journeys or air freight pricing and raw material, whatever it might be. That's definitely a trade-off, but I would always prioritize the product functionality. And so for me, as like a product at the heart, that's where I focus our end goal.
When you're doing one of these factory or lab trips, spending a week in the lab, as you said, what actually happens? What are you doing in that week?
It's very long. They're very long, brilliant days, but very long. And it can take shape in a different way. So, for example, our last 5-day trip, I would say 3 of the days were literally spent with lab techs. So mixing pigments, formula, going through stability testing, looking at different SPF levels, and really like on the spot mixing together to see different formulas, be it existing, updating formulas, or new products coming. And then you'll have some meetings. We did one of our quarterly supplier reviews where we'll go through kind of how we're tracking quarter to date, things like delayed lead times, freight that was on time, different shipment, different routes, different cost prices, different raw material changes. And we'll kind of cover all that there. And then also we'll do some innovation sessions. So they will often work on innovations based on briefings from us or based on what they're seeing in the markets. There might be an ingredient that's really coming out as like the top one that everyone needs. And they will present that innovation to us. And it's such a great way because you can obviously, in the world that we're living in, of course, samples could be sent to you, but there's nothing like sitting face to face in person and troubleshooting a component there and then, rather than getting it by post, sending comments and videos back. It goes back to them. It just adds weeks onto a process.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I must say
it's great. I do love what I have to say.
We have our development office in Cairo, and I travel many times per year, and it's the same kind of feeling. Code in that sense, nothing to mix, but the same kind of feeling. Like
same.
So the distance of South Korea, how do you manage that? Given I imagine you would have wanted to be every week in that lab meeting essentially. Plus you have the supply chain, like just the distance of waiting for product. What have you learned from having such a distant partner?
I think it puts discipline on everybody to manage timelines. I would also say product is probably in the toughest position in a business because they're often the heroes when it arrives on time and everything is great. And they are the villain sounds too strong, but they get it the worst when things are delayed because that physically impacts every single part and team on the business. Whereas like if the trade team, for example, have a delay with a retailer, there's an impact, but it doesn't impact everybody. Product is literally the only thing that all of us need to lean on together. So it can definitely be a tough department to be in because by nature, even with the world, like I was referencing, you can have delays that are totally out of your control and that can be hard to manage. I think in terms of kind of, and we've lots more on this scale to do, but in terms of when you're scaling, I think you go from more of like a reactive purchase this at the start to definitely more demand-led planning as you grow and scale. That gives you security. That allows you to be a little bit more pragmatic and future planned to manage inventory levels that you need, to foresee any issues that might cause delay, to give you a better chance of adhering to your time frame and your critical path so that not everything is like urgent and it's late and we need this and we need to fly it, etc. I remember the first time the team said to me, I think we need a demand planner. And I was like, for what? Sure, I'll just do the Excel sheet. And I have to say, when you get into that stage of business and when you're grateful enough to be at that scale where you do need it, it's fundamental because you need to get to more data-led rather than let's do this and get this quantity and see how it goes. And that can carry you a long way. And there's many great ways in which you can cut it. You sell out fast, you create a story, you still have stock, you can be agile with it. But yeah, I think getting to that more demand-led kind of data proofing has really helped us to manage scale from that side of the world in particular.
What does it mean in practice, or like moving from the gut feel, maybe a bit of Excel to a demand-led?
Yeah, so a few practical things. I think you need to have a bit of business data already to benchmark against, because generally when you're demand-led planning, say, for example, if we were launching a new foundation, it would generally be benchmarked off a previous foundation launch because you'll look at the different shades, maybe what percentage have sold in what period of time. Then you might factor in, it's going to more retailers now. We're a bigger business. We know our average basket value is higher, and they can put in those data points to pull out essentially what the forecast needs to be, rather than at the start going, okay, maybe we should get 3,000 units because we want this to last us X amount of time. So it's a little bit about having some data behind you, a little bit about making sure that you have the human adding in the nuances that are needed. So like that, a data set will only tell you so much if you say this is the foundation line and this is the next one. But we might know actually that this next one is the most trending. And so we actually need to double what the data is telling us because we believe in it. So it's important that you have that human mix in it, hence the demand-led role that we hired.
What's the hardest bit, or where do things go wrong most? Is it about like volume, or is it more about the timing thing you mentioned?
Definitely timing.
Yeah.
It's by far the most stressful part of a product business is not being able to manage everything because not everything is in your control. So you could have a component that gets delayed. When a component is delayed, everything is delayed. You could have a formula that gets to bulk production and doesn't pass stability, and so you just start again. Right now in the world we're living in with the various wars that are happening, raw material prices are either going out of stock or going up fourfold in the sake of a week. You could have unrest that's happening in a certain part of the world, and so the Suez Canal is just blocked. And so sea freight that you've planned for to get in 3 months is now 6 months because it's sitting on the sea and it can't move. And there's literally nothing that you can do outside of forecasting way out of time to get it here, to maybe preempt something that's going to happen in the world, and it might not. So it's very hard to have that famous brain on you. But also it's tough when you're a self-funded business because the further out you forecast, the more you're tying your cash up in stock. That's, you're not going to get paid for a very long time. So there's a balance as well to how much you want to make sure you're in stock and how much you want to manage your cash.
That's it. Maybe a good segue into to discussing cash a bit. You
Yeah.
famously and impressively bootstrapped
Mhm.
the business, and I
Yeah.
think you've also been, I don't know, not negative, but at least warning for taking in cash from external investors early. Have you ever come close to change your mind on that?
Yeah, like I would say I'm very open-minded to what the future holds for us in this topic. I think
Hmm.
ultimately I'm motivated by the goal that we're going on, and that is a very ambitious journey to scale globally. To scale globally, you need very few things, but you need a lot of it. You need great product, you need the right team, and you need cash.
Hmm.
So I'm not naive to the fact that these ambitions are global and are lofty and require a support system so you don't put your other parts of the business at risk. Um, so as much as we haven't taken investment to date, that's not because I'm solely against it by any means. It's more that it was like the right decision for us. We are very fortunate that we didn't need the cash like a lot of businesses get into, and sometimes the question is out of your hands because need must to kind of keep the business going. So it's never really felt like a much needed right time. And I think for me that if ever that day comes, it'll be just as much about the partner that we do
Hmm.
partner with, in as much as the cash that we take in.
When we talk about you're buying from South Korea, which obviously
Yes.
takes some time, and you need some margin of error, obviously, and you're selling mainly through wholesale, and I assume it's 30, 60, 90, maybe 120 days payment terms. How do you manage that built-in gap? I mean, you're growing fast.
Yeah. I think one of the best things when you are self-funded that it teaches you the whole time is discipline. So you just have to be rigorous in your cash flow cycle. And we would definitely have some periods of the year where cash flow is tighter than others because you'll pay up front, for example, to get ahead of Q4. You'll get the cash in Q4. So Q4, Q1 are generally better in terms of the cash flow cycle. And then, it'll dip and drop.
Hmm.
And you just have to be really prepared for that. And I think, I'm really lucky with our finance team. They're a well-oiled machine. And Brian here, he's our finance director, is with me a couple of years now. So he's seen the seasonality of the business and he really understands it. So he can forecast out ahead of time kind of what's needed and he'll manage that with teams, particularly with, it's more like the sneaky expenses, like a CapEx budget and, in-store works that you maybe take your eye off the ball because you're so focused on product and supply chain and freight, and actually it's those other costs that can really come in and impact the cash flow cycle quite quickly. So yeah, I think, and to be honest, regardless of whether you're self-funded or not, I think managing your cash is the number one fundamental thing that we all do, because you can have the best business in the world, the best will, the best intentions, but if you don't have the money in the account, it's not happening. So
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a good discipline that has been instilled into me and us as a business since the beginning.
Related to that, maybe, how do you think about pricing, which seems almost extra challenging in beauty, because
Yeah.
the range is so wide and it's not always so related to the actual sort of physical raw
Yeah.
material, right?
Yeah. I have always approached our pricing strategy very clearly and considered and wanted to be the accessible part of premium. So
Mm.
basically, you trade down to us from the likes of a bigger global brand. And we would typically maybe be 30, 40% more value to you than that brand, but you don't sacrifice on the quality. And
Mm.
that was always my goal. So as a working artist, I had every brand under the sun in my makeup kit. So when I was starting Sculpted, I knew first and foremost what I wanted to be, but I was also really clear there's no way I could make something subpar and put it on my bride's face. It's the most important day in their lives when they're getting glamorous that morning, that you can't be sacrificing or skimping on what level of formula or product or efficacy is going on them. So I was always really sure about that. And for me, that fits very clearly within our pricing strategy. And I think we get a lot of lovely praise from our customers in that they absolutely get the quality at a really acceptable price point. And I think that's a very special and important part of our USP that we need to protect as we grow, despite the changes in costs around the world.
Well, almost like despite having that call it affordable sounds almost wrong. I mean, you're talking
Yeah,
about premium products here, and you're also running flagship stores
yeah.
at some of the most expensive real estate or addresses out there.
Yeah.
What are the economics of an investment like that, or
Yeah, it's interesting. You should actually talk to my financial director about this, and he might have a different view. No, do you know what, right? I think there are some things that you will do in business. Firstly, we're lucky in that, majority of what we do is profitable because we do watch the bottom line very clearly. Again, kind of needing to make sure that that cash cycle and what we can reinvest in the business is there.
Mm.
So ultimately, we're very lucky that we've always had that privilege since the very beginning that we've been profitable. So anything we do is never, with a root carelessness or that loss making, who cares? We wouldn't operate like that. Flagships that were interesting for me. I often say to people, I had the determination to start flagships in a very considered approach where they weren't going to be on every corner street, but they were going to be in key cities that would be a halo effect for our retailers and basically be a brand hub, like a community destination, and come back to kind of my heritage as a makeup artist where you've got all the products under one roof. You can get your services, you can feel amazing, you get the special sculpted experience. But flagships are so much more than what goes to the till. And they're for all those reasons. They're the events, they're the community destinations. You can do your services. We can have different wellness activities that are happening at them. They become, part you maybe can't measure directly, but like brand and marketing houses that show up in these destinations for these people on their journey, whether they shop and purchase with you or they find it at their next stop where they see you in a different retailer. So I think it's hard to think that actually just the sales that goes through the till is what they're worth, because I firmly believe that they're worth more than that. And that's not to, again, be naive. And if something was terribly loss-making, put my head in the sand and go, no, it's great because it's doing all these things. But I do think the way that we've approached it, that it very much fits that strategy for us.
Obviously there are limits, as you're saying, to how loss-making, but does it also mean it's fine that they're burning a bit of cash?
Yeah, well, we're very lucky. Like they are profitable. So we're super lucky where we are, probably down to the awareness levels in the spaces we're in and the locations. Like you said, we definitely didn't scrimp on any low cost locations. So yeah, we don't have anything to worry about in that space right now. I think for some people, when they open stores, I could very much imagine the conversation being, we're okay for this to be a loss leader because it's going to bring in X, Y, and Z in other locations. And to be honest, the further I grow in the business, like years ago, that would have terrified me to hear it. Whereas now I could actually completely understand why people would make that decision, because they do feed each other in different ways.
And I'm curious maybe to dig into that. You've been multi-channel basically since the get-go. What are both the good and the bad sides of that? We see a lot of the brands we work with are moving into multi-channel from having been direct to consumer, for example.
Yeah.
And what are the lessons you've learned?
So first and foremost, I would say, to your point, we've always been on the channel. Flagships obviously didn't enter the strategy until maybe 4 years after launch. Sorry, that's a lie, 6 years after launch. I feel really good in our omni-channel, and I would have absolutely no regrets with how we've done it. And I would continue this in every market that we enter, because I really do think that it is our important secret sauce that we deliver across all three channels. I think if you're to take a step back and say, right, what are the benefits? I think the world we're living in needs a bit of digital, a bit of retail, particularly in the beauty landscape. It's quite a tactile product. In saying that, COVID taught us there's absolutely not a need to be in person, because you can get over those barriers online. But I think right now we're in a world where people might discover online, purchase in store, or equally they might purchase in store and then come back online because they might have loyalty, or they might have seen it on TikTok, or they're using a different new e-commerce channel or sales commerce channel through one of, TikTok, Amazon, whatever it might be. So I personally think it's really important and a great benefit to have the options available to the consumer of where you are. Some of the challenges that come with being omnichannel is, I suppose, when you think about your marketing budget, if you're trying to attribute and allocate what percentage is bringing what in parts of the business, A lot of the time your marketing activities will sit as an umbrella and they will feed retail and they'll feed digital and they'll feed flagships, but you don't really know exactly to what part or to what quantity. And that can be hard sometimes to really have a very clear return on investment. An issue, I wouldn't say a huge blocker, but just something to consider. The biggest issue, or if I could change and rework the world, I would, with being omnichannel, is data. So when you are D2C and you're selling on your own sites, you own that customer journey data. You can track them, you can understand them, you can see their behaviors. When you have 50% of your business in retail, you don't own that data. And that can be a real challenge because you're essentially missing out on half of your business patterns of where you could track what that customer is doing. And that's just the nature of having it split. So typically speaking, when we're looking at our hero SKUs, when we're looking at our, best products for lifetime value and the first product purchase and that link to the best customer acquisition, it's all related to e-com because we just don't have that level of detail from retail.
That's interesting. And given that the three sort of main channels are so different in a sense, right? I mean, different logic, different skills, different marketing, different data. Do you run them as different businesses as well, or is it more an integrated?
I would say we're definitely at a place where it's more integrated now because even outside of us as a business, we definitely want to get to a place where the customer feels like this is a 360 brand experience, because the last thing you ever want is, and it can happen sometimes, and we've maybe been on the cusp of it over the years, where you're kind of incentivizing a customer to shop online and there's nearly a punitive sense that they shopped in store, whereas actually the view is regardless of where they shop, they're shopping Sculpted, and that needs to be celebrated, but it also needs to feel consistent. So I think that is really important to us, like I said, more so even for the community and the customer facing element of it. But I do think as much as they're integrated, like flagships do have a more distinct difference. And that is because they have broader team. Our retail team is quite a different animal versus others. So it just has, a lot more to it. Like I often say to people, no regrets doing flagships. I absolutely love them. But they're a big consideration because they are a lot in one addition to a business.
Where do the worst, or it sounds bad, but I mean the worst complexities show up? Or I mean, can you even have the same supply chain inventory
across the omnichannel?
Yeah.
Yeah, in fairness, like supply chain isn't hugely impacted because it all comes into the same key warehouses across market, and they'll get distributed from there, be it into retailers, be it directly for B2C customer orders or into flagships. So that's okay. I think no surprise, the bigger complexities are generally around people, and more so coming back to the point I made earlier on kind of different maturity of markets, I suppose, for the omnichannel approach of trying to feed all three of them, having one global channel of where you're generally marketing from. And obviously in this day and age, like there's lots of different tactics you can do, but sometimes that can be a complexity because you're trying to speak to maybe what's happening on digital. Flagship events can maybe feel a bit too local when you've got a broad global audience. So it's just balancing how you give everything a bit of attention and a bit of love.
And for yourself with that level of complexity, is it still possible to have that one or two metrics that you look on each morning and sort of gives you a pulse of the business?
Yeah, definitely. And we would do, obviously we have our weekly sales every week, and it'll look at kind of that comes through on a Monday morning. It's like the first email I read to understand kind of how things have tracked. And yeah, we would definitely have kind of key metrics by each year. And I think the key thing, for want of repeating that, is actually to keep it simple and what you're looking at and what you're really drilling down to. But yeah, I would look at our sales absolutely non-negotiable every week.
Yeah, and maybe looking ahead briefly, what are the next big bets for Sculpted?
So I think naturally in a product business, our pipeline of innovation is heavy for the next kind of 2 or 3 years, which we are very excited about. And some things we're trying to go a bit bold on. So we're entering molds and 3D engineering formats of it. And, it's not the simplest route yet, but I think it's really important to kind of have your USP loud and proud in in this world that we're living in, which is very busy. And outside of that, it is the kind of continued globalization. So doubling down on the UK, there's still huge opportunity there for us. And then getting ready for new markets, and that can require different regulation, different formulations, different boxes, a whole different SKU count when it comes to supply, and just managing, the logistics that comes with addition of market.
Mm. And you mentioned the US. How far along are you in that planning?
So right now we're kind of going through the regulation side of things for the US. Our plan is to soft launch online in Q4 this year. So really that just means setting ourselves up for better competitive shipping, local logistics, and then looking to partner with a retailer in the following 24 months.
All right, I think this is brilliant. I have one question that I ask all guests.
Okay.
And what's your number one trade secret? That sort of hard-earned lesson that shapes how you build a company or how you run it.
Oh, I love that question. I would say my trade secret is the devil is in the detail. And I think this can be kind of controversial because we're kind of told, the bigger the business gets, the more people that are in, don't overwhelm yourself with detail. You need to stand out. You need to think on the business, not in the business. And I absolutely back all of that. But I am someone who feels the small, differences, the secret sauce is generally in that detail. And if you extract yourself too much from it, I think there's a real risk there. So it's a balanced dance the whole time of making sure that you empower and delegate those to work on things, but that you never become so far removed that you're actually losing that secret sauce.
I think that's a brilliant way to round off this episode. Aimee, it's been brilliant to have you here. Truly world-class operator and really an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining.
So lovely to chat. Thanks for having me on.